Now, what kind of an art historian would I be if I didn't formally introduce you to Leonardo da Vinci's Mona Lisa? Here she is. Now, you've probably seen her before. She's arguably one of the most famous artworks. She is identified by art historians, including Giorgio Vasari, as Lisa di Antonio Maria Garandini, and she was the wife of a Florentine merchant, Francesco del Giocondo. Now, in English, we refer to her as Mona Lisa, which translates to My Lady Lisa. Technically, that's true. Her name was Lisa. But she's also known as in French as La Gioconda, and that is speaking to her last name. She's married to Francesco del Giocondo. Now, we believe that Francesco ordered this portrait of his wife Lisa to be painted by Leonardo while he was still living in Florence. The idea would be that he'd finish the painting and then it would hang in their private residence in Florence. What we see is Lisa sitting in a chair, her hand resting on the armrest, and she's placed in front of a porch or a patio. We see the railing behind her, and then there are two columns that would have been on either side. Now I say would have been because they have been cut. Cut? Who cut the Mona Lisa? We're going to get into it a little bit further later on in this video, but it was cut to fit a frame by the King of France. We'll talk about it later, don't worry. And then behind her, we see this really elaborate landscape that goes off into the far distance. So let's talk about characteristics. Characteristics of the Renaissance that you're already familiar with. Atmospheric perspective. Yes. Linear perspective. Yes, and if we had more of the columns and the railing, linear perspective would have been a little bit more pronounced. What else do we see? Chiaroscuro. Yeah, we do. So here we have Lisa, and she has her hair down. She's wearing this transparent chocolate brown veil over her head, like a little covering, and then it's twisted over her shoulder. She's wearing this beautiful, elaborate, expensive day dress that has these golden mustard yellow silk sleeves, and then this chocolate brown and gold embroidered bodice. We see the highlights, midtones, and shadows defining the fabric here. Isn't that beautiful? Oh, Lisa, Lisa. Her beautiful brown curly hair hangs at her shoulders. Another element, more specific and something that is characteristic of Leonardo, isn't just chiaroscuro, but an element of blending called sfumato. And that's your next vocabulary term, sfumato. Sfumato is Italian for smoky or hazy. And sfumato is distinguished from chiaroscuro because it's modeling without line. And it's somewhat undefined or hazy. And what this does is it creates a more integrated figure into the space. I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, I have no idea what Miss Cortez is talking about. I don't want to say this word, sfumato, and I don't see it. What is she talking about? Chiaroscuro we have firmly established, but let's look at a detail like her hands in comparison to another work that has chiaroscuro but not sfumato. Okay, here we go. This is an early Italian Renaissance painting by Fra Filippo Lippi, and we have a Madonna and child with angels. There's the Virgin Mary, there's baby Jesus, and he's being lifted up onto her lap. Now, we're not going to look at this one in more detail as the specifics of composition and everything like that, but we are going to look at Lippi's use of highlights, midtones, and shadows. So we see beautiful highlights, midtones, and shadows. So we can say that this uses chiaroscuro, but look at the outlines of these figures. Let me go in more detail. Look at how he clearly defines the angel's curls from Jesus's leg. Look at how he clearly defines each of her fingers with almost a black line. Almost like when you're drawing a cartoon of something and you have these heavy outlines to define the figure. I'm not saying that that's bad, but what I am saying is that Leonardo doesn't use those lines. Do you see that? The transition of the form is not through line work, but simply a change of color. Modulation is softer. And what this does, and what is said in your definition, is it integrates the figure into the space rather than being isolated. She more fully is incorporated into the highlights, midtones, and shadows of the railing and the landscape. So this characteristic called sfumato is something that we see used in Leonardo's work. It's not that he's the only one that does it. I'm introducing it here because it's another refined element of chiaroscuro that we don't see in every Renaissance painting, but we do see done very often in Leonardo's and done beautifully in the Mona Lisa. Now let's look at how she's sitting in this chair. The view that Leonardo has given us is called a 3/4 view. It's this one right here. And then to help understand this viewpoint, this is looking at somebody from the front, from the back, and from the side. He's given us this shift where she isn't facing front, but her shoulders are tilted, requiring her head to tilt or to turn in order to face us, the viewer. I call your attention to this because it is uncharacteristic of female portraits during the Renaissance to be placed in a 3/4 view. This is the traditional portrait view of a woman in profile. And Leonardo has challenged this rule by placing a female in 3/4. 3/4 view is more often done for male subjects, not female subjects. Now what this also does is it creates this fantastic energy or spiral of the figure. I want you to imagine where she is sitting in front of us and how this very basic woman sitting in a chair is actually quite dynamic. The chair, we can see the side of the chair is facing the viewer like this, right? Okay, so that means that her legs, let's go this way. Let's sit like Lisa. Okay, Lisa. So her chair is like this. That means her legs are pointed this way, right? But she's required to turn to face us. She doesn't just turn her neck. She shifts her shoulders to rest her arms on the chair arm, and then shifts her head at the neck to face us and the viewer. And look at her eyes. Are her eyes in the center? No, they've shifted even further. So what we have is this beautiful spiral of energy. Up, up, up. And our eye is able to pick up on this movement through her so that she's not some kind of static, flat profile, but instead a three-dimensional figure. Notice too how her arms and her elbows are placed. What is this type of composition? Yep, a pyramidal composition. Oh my goodness. So he's given us pyramidal composition to stabilize this spiral of energy. Leonardo, so clever. When we look at the background here, yes, it's obvious. We can see the atmospheric perspective, but we also see this almost fantastical landscape. I say fantastical because it's not like any space or landscape in or around Florence. It's this very generic hilly space with bridges and pathways that lead up and around. And many people, art historians and historians alike, have tried to find secrets or reasons or answers or questions within the folds of this landscape. In fact, the entire painting has these swarms of controversies, conspiracy theories around it. One of them being the fact that the portrayed figure, a female, has been placed in this three-quarter masculine perspective, leading some to believe that this is not a portrait of a woman, but instead a man. Now, some have said that this is maybe a portrait of Leonardo's young lover. Leonardo was homosexual, and we know that this was a kind of open secret, and so some historians have argued that this is his way of presenting his sexuality, his lover as a woman. Another theory is that this is a portrait of Leonardo in drag, that this is him battling with his own sexuality and the binaries of male and female. This right here is sometimes used to argue that case. It's a self-portrait of Leonardo from one of his later journals, and then a side-by-side with Mona Lisa, and the argument being that they match up, they align enough that this could be him as a young man in women's clothing. I'm trying to be unbiased and not be sarcastic when presenting these, because I do not believe in them. I do not believe in the controversy surrounding this. I think that this is simply Lisa, a portrait of a woman that was meant to be placed in her family's home. There are several factors that help support this argument. First of all, many say, well, she's making eye contact, and that is a masculine behavior. It was seen as improper for women to make eye contact with men who were not related to them. And here is Lisa, and she's making eye contact, so she must be a man. Remember that the context of this painting would have been to be placed in her house, where she would have been viewed by members of her family. So the eye contact would not be seen as disrespect or going against protocols. Another argument about her as not truly a woman is that her hair is down. For a proper woman to be out in public in Florence at this time, you would have your hair in elaborate coiffures. They would be braids and ribbons and bows, and there'd be pins and pearls and jewels, and it would be a statement of your status. Your hair down is not only stowing you in a relaxed state, but was often associated with looser women, women of the streets, prostitutes. We know that Lisa was the wife of a well-off merchant in Florence. So her wearing her hair down is because she's home. She's not out in public. This again would have been viewed in the family home. Now there are some elements that still capture the eye of people. The fact that the landscape does not align, if you look at behind her, the horizon line doesn't quite line up. The horizon is taller on this side than this side. And so many people have tried to read into that. There are shapes like this bridge back here that people have tried to read numbers and symbols into. The fact that her eyes don't seem to be sharing the same expression as her lips, and her lips in this Mona Lisa smile you might often hear people speak about, that she's hiding something, some kind of secret. What secret did Leonardo capture when he was painting her portrait? Some people, I'm thinking of a neurologist, has said that perhaps she suffered from some kind of neurological disorder or stroke that did not allow for her eyes to match the expression of her lips. I don't know. What I do know is that maybe some of the modulations of her facial expression have been lost because Leonardo used oil paint. Now, oil paint is typically a very stable paint, but this painting was in some really difficult conditions for hundreds of years. What? What are you talking about, Miss Cortez? Well, I told you that the King of France cut the sides of this painting. Well, how did he get a hold of this? Wasn't this supposed to be for Lisa? Leonardo never finished this painting. He's notorious for never finishing his work. He's just so busy and he gets easily distracted. There's lots of letters and contracts that he never fulfilled from everybody. So he didn't finish Mona Lisa before he moved to Milan. And then he did all that work in Milan. And then he moved to France. He was hired by the King of France. And so he took all of his unfinished work, including Lisa, up to France with him, where he then continued to work, and then he died. He died a very old man, so don't feel sorry for him. He lived a long, prosperous life. But when he died, the King of France, Francis I, bought all of Leonardo's stuff from his assistants. He was like, I'll just buy his studio. I'll take all that stuff with him. And so Francis purchased the Mona Lisa. And then he had it hung up in one of his bathrooms. It was hung up in a bathroom for hundreds of years. Now, hot, humid conditions are not good for any painting. And so she yellowed over time and flaked off over time. And by the time that she was placed for public display in the Louvre, she had already kind of lost a lot of those details, including the sides of the panels. What we can assume is what we have in a second Mona Lisa. What? Yeah, did you know there's a second Mona Lisa? We believe that this was painted by a student of Da Vinci during Da Vinci's time. It's now at the Prado Museum in Madrid, Spain. And we say that it's done by a student of Leonardo before Leonardo died because you can see some of the columns still remain. So this was painted prior to it being cut and then further deteriorating in a bathroom. So it's not done by Leonardo, but a student, but we can then assume a lot of the facial expressions that have been lost or dulled over time when we look at the second work of art. So, I mean, I hate to tell you that she's not anything remarkable or special. That's just who she is. I will tell you why she is so famous, though, in our next video.